Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Thanks for joining us. We are learning Maseches Nedarim Daf Tes Zayin and Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, and we're starting at a fresh Mishnah on the bottom of Tes Vav Amud Beis. The Mishnah reads, Shvua she'eni yashan. If a person, this is a terrible shvua to make. A person makes a shvua that they're not going to sleep. She'eni medaber, that they're not going to speak. She'eni mehalech, that I'm not going to walk. That's binding. In regards to a shvua, that's binding because a shvua is about the person. Masha'en kain, a neder is about an external item. It's, I guess, the classical chefta gavra chakira. It kind of applies here, as we'll soon see, because the Mishnah continues with Nedarim. And this Mishnah is contrasting shvuas and Nedarim. By a neder, if a person says korban lo ochelach, this korban I will not benefit from you, or ha korban, this korban, adding the word ha she'ochelach, and that, or also lo korban lo ochelach. All of those cases are mutter. Those cases are not considered binding. And the Gemara at the very top of Tes Zayin Amud Aleph brings us back to a machlokas that we saw many days ago, a machlokas between Rav Meir and Rav Yochanan, that when we're doing hatfasa, when we're making an association between an item that has no status to an item that has status, so there we saw there's a machlokas if it has to be ki Yerushalayim with the letter kaf sheet, that's Rav Yehuda. Rav Meir says no, it could be even looser than that. So here we see the same machlokas, mani mas nisan. Who's the author of our Mishnah? Must be that it's Rav Meir. Why? The Rav Yehuda lo shani le korban v'lo shani le ha korban. The examples that are given in our Mishnah, he never would have articulated them because none of them have the letter kaf. He would never have said more than one sample. He would have said what he said, and he already said what he said, which is that unless it says ki Yerushalayim with the kaf, then your hatfasa doesn't work. So the Gemara therefore says that our Mishnah is like the Shita of Rav Meir. However, that's not so simple, because on the top of Tes Zayin Amud Aleph, second line, a Maseifa, what does the rest of our Mishnah say, the one that we just learned on the bottom of Tes Vav Amud Beis? It says the korban lo ochelach mutter. But that if that's true, then Rav Meir can't be the author of our Mishnah, because the korban lo ochelach Rav Meir oser. That's a big stira. If you're going to say that our Mishnah is Rav Meir, and we have a line in the end of our Mishnah that conflicts with another source of Rav Meir, that's two sources in the Tanaim of Rav Meir that don't agree. And not only that, when a person says lekorban, it's as if he said lekorban yehe lefichach lo ochelach. You're not allowed to benefit from that food, and therefore Rav Meir can't be the author of our Mishnah, because the author of our Mishnah doesn't say the same thing that Rav Meir does. So therefore the Gemara says lo kasha. That's not correct. It really depends on the language. Hada amar lekorban and hada amar lo lekorban. We assumed, we had a havamina that la korban was a reference to not having it be a korban, but it's not true. The word lekorban has one din, and the words lo lekorban have yet another din. Again, as mentioned, it is very hard for us to grasp some of the nuances of these languages because it's not our mother tongue, and we need to learn these sugyas very well. I'll just give a great example. Let's say this was like the thing to do, like in yeshiva. I'm going to do a tainas dibur on Yom Kippur. So what is that? Is that a neder? Is that a shvua? Is it binding? Is it not binding? Can you speak? What about brachos? What about asher yatzar? What about saying good Shabbos? What if your Rebbe comes over to you? What if your parents come over to you? It's so many shilas. So one should be very careful at the outset of a tainas dibur. First of all, maybe that shouldn't be the first step. But even if it's the decision, one should be very careful with what the parameters are, so they don't end up in a worse scenario than when they started. Tainas dibur is great, some self-discipline is good, but if you're causing yourself isurim and chiyuvim of korbanos and malkos because you're namharetz, as we all are in this area, so then you're probably better off not doing such a thing unless you know what you're talking about. On Yom Kippur, no less. Yeah. Right after Kol Nidre. You just finished Kol Nidre, and you're like, by the way, Tainas dibur. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the best answer. It's only for people who have a tainas dibur. Yeah. That's Purim Torah already. On Yom Kippur, it's Kippurim. New Mishnah. What if a person says shvua lo ochelach, I'm not going to eat your food, or hashvua she ochelach, or your food that I do eat? We'll have to understand why there's a contrasting language. In the first case in the Mishnah it was lo ochelach, and in the second case it's she ochelach, and then back to the other model, lo shvua lo ochelach. In all of these cases aser, the food would then become aser because that is a binding neder. Mechlal, that what can we infer from here? That the middle case of the Mishnah where it says the hashvua she'ochelach de lo achilna mamish, the way that it seems to be understood in our Mishnah is that in the middle case when it says hashvua ochelach and then the end of the Mishnah says aser, that means if I make a shvua she'ochelach to eat your food, it's obviously meaning that I won't eat your food. That's obviously what it means. But then why does our Mishnah flip-flop in the language? One case lo ochelach and in another case ochelach. So what does the Gemara say? Mashmad, it's Michlal, it seems from our Gemara that when it says she'ochelach, it really means lo achilna. Mashma, it means that we don't need it. In other words, we look at it contextually and we say, if a person is taking a restriction upon themselves, and they say, I'm making a shvua of ochelach, in regards to the food of yours that can be consumed, it obviously means that I don't want to consume your food. That's what the shvua means. I can't make a shvua that I'm eating your food. It's not my food. I can make a shvua that I'm not eating your food. So the Gemara says it must be that ochelach is a specific, ochelach is a broad enough language that it can mean both, it can mean eat or don't eat, depending on the context. But the Gemara says that's not possible because we have a Mishnah in Maseches Shavuos. Urminhu, Shavuos, Shtaim Shein Arba. When it comes to Shavuos, there's two versions, which really means that there's four versions. And what does that mean? Here are the versions. She'ochel v'shelo ochel. Here, the Mishnah says these are not the same thing. You want it to be mashma from our Mishnah that really ochel can mean lo ochel based on context. But here, from the Mishnah, from the Brisa in Maseches Shavuos, it's not true because it explicitly states she'ochel and v'shelo ochel, and she'achalti v'shelo achalti in the past tense as well. So those are the four versions. And midika amar, and we need the hagos habach here to add in a word. Midika amar she'ochel v'shelo ochel, she'achalti v'shelo achalti, michlal de she'ochel lach de achil namashma. It seems that eating food means eating food, and it doesn't mean not eating food. All right, let's review. This is the Gemara's question. Our Mishnah had a strange language. The middle case of our Mishnah on the top of Tezayin Mad Aleph said, "Ha shvua she'ochelach." I make a shvua about being ochelach, eating your food. The Gemara says that means you don't eat the food, which means that ochel has a bit of a loose contextual translation. The Gemara says, "What about Maseches Shavuos?" There, the Gemara in Maseches Shavuos says that that's not true because it explicitly gives different cases, ochel and lo ochel. That's the Gemara's question. And two answers. Third of the way down on Tezayin Amud Aleph, the Gemara says, Amar Abaye, she'ochel shtei lashonos mashma. You're correct. The word ochel, it really just depends on the context. And the Gemara details in story form what this would look like. And it makes perfect sense. It says the Gemara as follows. Hayim asarvin bolechel. You refuse to eat. The Amar, achilna, achilna. And you finally cave and you're like, okay, fine, I'll eat and I'll eat. And then Vesu, shvua she'ochel. And then you make a shvua that you're going to eat. So let's look at what you said. You said achilna, achilna. Okay, guys, I'll eat. Relax, I'll eat. Then you make a shvua about it. Obviously, this is shvua she'ochel de achilna mashma. Obviously, in that context, you were trying to say that you were going to eat. Makes perfect sense. Aval, Amar lo achilna, lo achilna. If I tell them, guys, stop forcing me to eat. I do intermittent fasting. I'm not going to eat. I'm not going to eat. V'su Amar shvua she'ochel. And then he says the language of our Mishnah. Ha shvua she'ochel lach. What's going on here? Clearly, de lo achilna ka'amar. Obviously, that's what he meant because we're doing contextual learning here. If my previous statement was lo achilna, and then I make a shvua with the language of ochel lach, obviously that ochel lach was meant to be learned in context because it doesn't make sense to say the exact opposite of what I said a second ago. However, halfway down, Rav Ashi doesn't agree. Rav Ashi Amar, no, she'ochel de shvua she'i ochel ka'amar. In our Mishnah, there's a mistake. In the middle case of our Mishnah, where it says hashvua she'ochel lach, it should say lo ochel lach. He says the Mishnah just has an error. And that actually makes sense in the following way. The reason it makes sense is because look at case 1 and case 3 in our Mishnah. No, I mean, the languages are slightly different because in case 1, it's shvua, and case 2 is hashvua. Just like we saw in the previous case of korban and ha-korban. That's his change. And that's logical. It's logical because why did the Mishnah change its language in the middle case? According to the first answer, don't worry, ochel, it's contextual, so whatever it is. But according to the second answer, no, it's not contextual. Ochel is different than lo ochel. And he says the Mishnah just has a mistake in it.
No. I'm saying once we change it now, the middle case is ochel.
Correct. In the same way that in the previous Mishnah, korban and ha-korban were different.
Just shvua and ha-korban.
Correct, exactly. So that's Rav Ashi's shita. No, she'ochel de shvua she'i ochel kamar. Says the Gemara, well, hold on one second. Im kain pshita ma'ila memra. If it says lo achilna, then it should be obvious as to what it means. Says the Gemara, not necessarily. Ma'u detema mekam lishnahu de iskele, and mekam according to the Ran and other meforshim should be me'akim akmimus. You said something wrong, something slipped out of your mouth incorrectly. You didn't mean to say I ochel, you meant to say ochel. You said the wrong thing, and maybe the iskale, then it became a stumbling block before you. Do we look at your words as they came out of your mouth, or do we contextualize them? No, says Gemara Kamash Malan, we take your words at face value. Now, why didn't Abaye hold like Rav Ashi and vice versa? Abaye lo amar tam ki Rav Ashi. Again, the stylistics are not common. Abaye lo amar tam ki Rav Ashi delok tanish iochel. He says that's just not what my Mishnah says. You want to change the language of the Mishnah. The Maisa, whatever the printing press was of the day, there wasn't one. But whatever they had for Mishnayos, none of the Mishnayos in the base Medrash of Abaye said in our Mishnah of the negative of lo ochel. In the middle case, it said ochel. So that's great. You want to change the girsa, but that's just not what's happening here. So Abaye had a textual issue with it. The Rav Ashi, strange language here. Look at this. Nodi min tam de Abaye, like nova nod. He wants to wander away, get away from the shita of Abaye. Why? Kasavar shelo ochel nami mashma shtei lashonos. Oh, this is a gorgeous argument. He says to Abaye, if you're willing to look at the word ochel and say that we understand it based on context, you should also be willing to look at the words lo ochel and apply it in context. And Abaye doesn't do that. It's a great argument. He's like, you can't just decide that ochel means lo ochel. And if you are deciding that, and it's totally based on context, then it doesn't matter what you say, ochel or lo ochel. You can't just choose. So he is bothered by the integrity of Abaye's claim. You can't just say that ochel means lo ochel based on context. So this is one of the hard parts of learning Gemara, is that you learn machlokos later on that apply from Daf base. You have to go back in every case. That according to Rav Ashi, hold on one second. According to Rav Ashi, the language is always specific, and according to Abaye, it's always contextual. No. This is not about yados. This is about how do we look at the words that were said. Correct. It's contextual or it's just factual. So Abaye is like, you just gotta, if the guy says, okay, I'll eat and I'll make a shvuah, and then he says, ochel, obviously we know what that means. But even if it sounds the opposite, okay, I won't eat this, and then he makes a shvuah of ochelach. So Abaye is like, we know what's going on here. Rav Ashi is like, no, we don't know what's going on here. We don't know what's going on. How could you say literally the opposite of what you mean and have it mean what you say it means? It's not, so they each have good times on one another. Abaye is headstrong about the Mishnah. The Mishnah doesn't say what you're saying. Rav Ashi is like, you're being, you're not making sense. You just picked the word ochel means lo ochel. And this new argument that he's giving is the other way, which is that if ochel means lo ochel, then lo ochel can mean ochel, and then what does the word lo mean after all? And the Gemara says 2/3 of the way down, continuing Rav Ashi's argument, a person was refusing to eat. V'amar lo achilna. So he says, I'm not going to eat. It's intermittent fasting. I'm not going to eat. V'amar nami shvuah, and he says a shvuah. So then it should be bein she'ochel, bein she'lo ochel. It shouldn't matter, says Rav Ashi to Abaye. It shouldn't matter what the next words are that come out of his mouth. In your words, you Abaye, you say that ochel can be lo ochel. Who cares what you say afterwards? We're looking at the context. You could say I ate or I won't eat. It doesn't matter because it's always contextual, and we don't see that. Hadena chilna mashma de amar. It should be that no matter what, it's going to imply eating because of the context. V'iko l'trusa nami lishna shvua shelo ochel shvua. Shelo ochel shvua de lo achilna kamar, and it can be the exact opposite also. Ochel and lo ochel shouldn't make a difference, and that's not the case. Ella, therefore, Rav Ashi's finally the nail in the coffin. He says, Tana, the author of the Mishnah or the Bryce and Maseches Shvuos, which gives us the Shtaim Shehein Arba, the 4 languages, Achalti, Lo Achalti, and Ochel and Lo Ochel. He says that Tana is Pascha, She'ochel de Achilna Mashma. It's like a funny conclusion. By the way, when we say eat, it means eat. That's what it means. It doesn't mean don't eat, and we don't look at context. We look at the words that come out of your mouth. It's fascinating because if you're missing the letter kaf in a shvuah, it's a 0. But if you say the exact opposite of what you want to say, according to Abaye, mutar v'mutar, then it becomes a neder. It's crazy. The whole assumption is crazy. This is how far, this was when we would need to take like weeks to do this, find all of the Abayes when he disagrees with people, and how headstrong is he about Mishnayos? Is he really looking at that Mishnah and saying, you cannot change that Mishnah? Mishnahs cannot be changed. Could be that Abaye has a theme like that. What? Mishnah and Shavuos? Yeah, but we're analyzing the Mishnah in Maseches Shavuos against ours as to whether or not Ochel Lach could mean Lo Ochel Lach. We're asking a different question. I'm just giving this as an example. You're right. It could be Reb Meir. Same issue. Same issue. He's not. I'm raising a general issue that we've split hairs on this already previously in the Masechta, and now we're saying Mamish like the exact opposite thing, and Rabbi still wants it to. What? Yeah, this is a question that my father would like, how could it be that we're so fine-tuned about Gemara, but now we said it's something that's 180 degrees the opposite and it's still a neder. Which Mishnah? Are you talking about the Mishnah that's the new Mishnah in our Gemara 10 lines down? Shua lo ochela? Mm-hmm. How do you know that? Mm-hmm. Shvua lo ochelach. That's not hashvua ochelach. Lo shvua lo ochelach aser. Yeah, the last case is evidence against Reb Meir. The previous cases are not necessarily because it's not michlal lavat hashemein. Very good. Very good. Next Mishnah. Zeh chomer b'shvuos mi Nedarim. Now, really, the way that we need to look at this is as if all the Mishnayos are connected, because otherwise this line makes no sense. This line is saying that which we just learned, we're 5 lines from the bottom, Zeh chomer b'shvuos Nedarim, because the previous Mishnah talks about shvuos, right? So, and okay, fine, but now that's really going on previous Mishnayos. Then says the Mishnah, v'chomer b'nedarim mi b'shvuos keitzad. Where do we see a stringency by nedarim greater than shvuos? Says the Gemara, Omar, a person says, Konam sukkah shani ose, lulav shani notel, tefillin shani maniach, b'nedarim aser. If a person says a neder that they are not going to do these mitzvos, the halacha is that the neder is binding. However, b'shvuos mutter. If it comes to a shavua, a person makes a shavua that they're not going to fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah, they're not going to fulfill the mitzvah of lulav, or they're not going to fulfill the mitzvah of tefillin, that doesn't work. This is great shas yudias klalius. A person says, are you allowed to promise I'm not going to keep halacha? It says, depends if it's a neder or a shavua. If it's a neder, then that works. That can function. If you say, I hereby promise that I don't put on tefillin on day X, Y, or Z, that works. That works. Masha'en ken, if you say a shavua, then that doesn't work. Right? What's the nafkamina? Nedarim are in items, shvuas are in people. As a person, you're not allowed to do that. What? Right, or ein shavua chalal shvua, which we're going to learn about a little bit more. We're going to learn about that more today.
For mitzvah say, because I remember when we said that you can't make a neder for something that is awesome.
It's a great question because we spoke about the case of the mitzvah of Ona. We spoke about that, but that's a mitzvah saseh. And there too, we said that one could make a neder to aser the hana of tashma shamita. That's true. Sure, we've learned the case. It's just not coming up. But by Lavin, is that true?
Because these are all essays.
These are all essays. Yeah. Yes. But here also it's more simple. The man says, that chefta tefillin, I will not put that on today. So then that's a neder. The neder is stronger than the essay. Why don't we say essay dochalos essay? Okay. So that's that part of the Mishnah. But b'shvuas mutter she'ein nishbain la'avor ala mitzvahs. You're not allowed to make a shvua in the mitzvahs. And the Rishonim here make the chakira that by a shvua, a person is saying about themselves, I will not perform this. That you cannot say. You want to make a neder. I hereby make a neder that I will not put on tefillin. That's different because that's not about you. That's about the chefta. You can forbid yourself from a chefta. You can't forbid yourself from a mitzvah, from the mitzvah itself. Yes, Malkos. It's mitzvah ba be'avera. I don't know how that works. What?
He's going against the Torah.
He is going against the Torah because he violated his nether.
Right, but if it's,
I'm curious about Stan's question.
People say he doesn't get baffled. I don't know. Some cases you get, you're over not keeping your word. You don't get baffled.
We saw one case like that. We'll see another case today. Or when the cases are derabanan, it's like that also. Bal Yachel derabanan, which we learned about. Okay, top of Tes Zayin Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, when you say that there's chomer, that there's a stringency over here more than in the other place, michlal de nederhu, that it seems to be that there still is some kind of neder. This is more strict than that. One is deoraisa, and the other is mutter, or the other is a lesser deoraisa. So the Gemara is saying there's room to imply that really michlal nederhu, that it really does have the status of a neder. But how can you say that? Well, mutter ktani, the Mishnah that we learned earlier today, says mutter. So it seems to be that even it's chomer b'shuos Nedarim, but we see that that in some of those cases, the other way around, chomer nedarim b'shuos. Yeah, that's our case. That if it's chomer nedarim b'shuos, then in some cases it says mutter. Says the Gemara, you're looking at the wrong Mishnah. Aseifa de idach bava ktani. We're actually talking about a different Mishnah. The Mishnah that we're talking about is the Mishnah we started with today, on the bottom of Tes Vav Amud Beis. Shvua she'eni yoshen, she'eni medaber, she'eni mahalach aser, zechomer b'shvuos mi ben nedarim. And here the Gemara says that it's the lower status is not an Isser Doraisa mamish, or maybe it's Isser Doraisa without malchos, but it's a chomer. One is more strict than the other. That was the case of our Mishnah that we started with today. And at the 2 dots, 4 lines down, the Gemara says, chomer ben nedarim, shvuos ketzad. And here the Gemara quotes a machlokas and how to understand a particular halacha. Rav Kahana Masni, he taught the halacha that we're about to learn in the following names: Amar Rav Gidol, Amar Rav. However, Rav Yomi Masni, he said that it wasn't Rav Gidol, Amar Rav, but rather Amar Rav Gidol, Amar Shmuel. So we don't exactly know where. We have no idea. We don't know which person it came from. Is this din fundamentally start with Rav or with Shmuel? What din are we talking about? Says the Gemara, Minayin she'ein nishba'in la'avor ala mitzvos. How do we know that a person is not allowed to make a shvua which goes against the mitzvos and the Torah? So it says the Gemara, Talmud lomar lo yachel divaro. Divaro lo yachel. Your own words, your own things upon which you take a shvua, that you cannot be mechel, you can't override. However, aval mechel hu lechefsei shamayim. But if you make a shvua, but your shvua goes against the chefsei shamayim, it goes against Ratzon Hashem, so then the halacha is that you don't keep your shvua. So that's where the Gemara says we learn this halacha that a shvua doesn't work against mitzvos. Even if you try and take a shvua, it doesn't work. You're still obligated halachically to do the mitzvah. So a person takes a shvua that they're not going to sit in a sukkah, go to the sukkah. That's not the way things work. A neder is different. But if you're going to say a shvua, this is the mar makom that indicates that when it comes to shvua, that we need to be more strict. So it says the Gemara, Maishna neder. Why is it that a neder does work? Maybe a neder also shouldn't work, because dichsiv ish kidor neder lashem lo yachel devaro. So shvua nami haksiv o hishava shvua lashem lo yachel devaro. Both of these halachic areas, Nedarim and shvua, seem to have the language of lo yachel devaro. So why is it that we say that only a shvua cannot be done in the face of a mitzvah, but a neder can be upheld in the face of a mitzvah? So it says the Gemara, 2 answers. Amar Abaye, Hada Amar Hanaas Sukkah Alai, Hada Amar Shvua Shelo Ehene Min HaSukkah. So one is a neder, the first language of Hada Amar Hanaas Sukkah Alai, the Hana of the Sukkah, the Hana of the mitzvah of the Sukkah, that is a neder, and that functions, and therefore you cannot go in. As mentioned, the Chakira is that we say that a neder is on a chefts and a shvua is on the gavra. However, if a person says shvua shelo ehene min hasukah, that you cannot do, because when it comes to a shvua, that's talking about you, the individual, and you, the individual, cannot take on a shvua because you're the individual. Your whole existence can't be anti-Torah. That doesn't work. You can't take on a shvua like that. So then the Gemara says, Rava is very bothered by this. Amar Rava, your phraseology, Abaye, was not good. Famous Mishnah. Whoever thought it would be found in halachic literature, but it is. The Gemara says your example of a neder versus a shvua is not a good example, because you're focusing on hana. Hana has nothing to do with this. Hana is not a halachic factor in regards to the shmiras hamitzvos. We don't keep, on the lower level, we keep mitzvos for schar. to avoid onesh. But on a higher level, we do them because they're right. We do them because they're good. They're just tov. They're just good things. Ella Amar Rava, he changes things ever so slightly, 5 lines from the bottom. Huda Amar Yeshiva Sukkah Alai, classical language of Neder. A man says that I'm not going to sit in a sukkah. Huda Amar Shvua Shelo Eshe Basukah. And in those cases, that's where we see the Chakira again between Neder and Shvua. So to review this little section of Gemara, we were trying to figure out our Mari Mikomos as to how we know that a Shvua cannot be done Keneged Cheftzei Shamayim, and the Gemara quoted a drasha. But the Gemara is bothered by that answer. You learned it out from the psukim that we just discussed. That's not correct. We have another Mari Makom that teaches the same thing, that a Shvua does not work in the face of Cheftzei Shamayim. What is that? Titania. Yachol nishba levatel es ha-mitzvah velo bitel. That if a person makes a shvua to be mevatel es ha-mitzvah velo bitel, and they were not mevatel, so then yachol yehei chayiv. Maybe they should be chayiv on the neder because they were not mevatel the mitzvah. They did the mitzvah. Talmud lomar, your shvua was garbage. Lehara o lehetiv. What is this pasuk lehara o lehetiv? Ma hatova rishus. Just like when a person makes a shvua on something tov, on something good, it has to be something optional. I hereby commit to learn at this time, or to do an act of chesed, or something that doesn't have a shiur to, whatever it is. So it says the Gemara, af hara rishus, that when you're doing something wrong, it has to be in an area of rishus. Yatsa nishba levatel es ha-mitzvah v'lo bitel she'ein rishus biyado. You're not allowed to do that, says the Gemara. So now we see a second Mari Makom that seems to indicate with clarity that a shvua doesn't work keneged cheftzei shamayim. So what do we do with our 2 Mari Makomos? The Gemara says we need both. Says the Gemara, chad kra. One of the psukim is lemifterei mi korban, the korban shvua, from a korban for the shvua that you violated. The chad lemifterei mean lav the shvua. So one is about the korban and one is about the lav. And what the pasuk is saying is that when you make this shvua, the shvua is, here's a shvua hareini nishba, that I'm never going to enter a sukkah. What's the halacha? Go into the sukkah. What about your lav and korban? No such thing. 2 psukim to push away from that. You don't know what you're talking about. You shouldn't be making these shvuas, but l'maisa, if you make the shvua, you say you're not going to be chayiv a korban and you're not going to be chayiv on the lav. The next Mishnah reads 6 lines down. We're just going to turn to the top of the next page and then we'll stop and pick up again 45 minutes on Shabbos before Mincha, which is at, what did I say, 317. 317. This new Mishnah reads, continuing on the same theme of differences between neder and shvua. This Mishnah reads, yesh neder b'soch neder. You can stack nedarim. Ve'ein shvua b'soch shvua, but you cannot stack shvuos. Ketzad, what's the case? Omar, if a person makes a neder and they say hareini nazir im ochel, hareini nazir im ochel. He says the same language of neder twice. What's the din? And then ve'achal, and he breaks the neder, or he what does he say? Yeah, im ochel. If I eat, I become a nazir. If I eat, I become a nazir, and then he takes a bite out of a hamburger. So guess what? He's a nazir. Not only is he a nazir once, he's a nazir twice over. Chayv al kol achas ve'achas. Now we have already learned this, that nazirus can't be stacked like this on top of one another. They're staggered. So when you finish your first 30 days, you start another 30 days. That's what it means over here, that we can stack them. It doesn't mean that you have double korbanos, 6 korbanos instead of 3 on day 30. That's not correct. It's 30 days, bring the korbanos, and then another 30 days. That's what it means over here. So if a person says this language of hareini nazir im ochel twice, and then he eats, chayv al kol achas ve'achas. However, shvua shelo ochel, let's say a person makes a shvua that I will do X if I don't eat. I will do X if I don't eat, and then he ate, therefore triggering the shvua. Says the Gemara, that doesn't work. Eino chayv ala achas, because we know that ein shvua chal al shvua. And our Gemara starts with a qualification, one that seems to change the language of our Mishnah a little bit, as follows. Third of the way down at the open of the Gemara, Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. Amar Rav Huna, lo shanu elo d'amar hareini nazir hayom, hareini nazir lemachar. Your phraseologies cannot be exactly the same when we're stacking Nazirus. Our Mishnah actually did quote the same exact language, but the Gemara says in the name of Rav Huna that we're actually changing our Mishnah. Because in your second version, you added another day. You said, I want to be a Nazir today. I want to be a Nazir tomorrow. That indicates you're taking on 2 separate commitments. Therefore, Chayla Nazirus al Nazirus. Therefore, you can stagger, whatever the right language is. Correct.
So if you say another tomorrow, you got to work it out without keeping it first.
Correct. So the way the Gemara, the way the Mishnah and the Gemara is looking at it is that whenever you say this, the phrase, the neder-oriented phrase, you should only say it once. If you're saying a neder-oriented phrase, it implies you want another neder.
No, that's what I'm saying. So the Mishnah, the way it was okay. It made more sense to the Mishnah say it's 30 and 30. You're saying tomorrow.
Yeah.
In my mind, it makes it
Shmuel, we'll see in a minute, is going to argue with the Shita of Rav Huna, and that probably you'll find more comfort there. I personally agree with you, but I also understand what Rav Huna is saying. If you say the same phrase, there's someone who I speak to regularly. Every time he picks up the phone, shalom, shalom, every time, twice. Well, you said it once already. How many times? People used to make fun of me when I did the announcements. Good Shabbos, good Shabbos. I used to say, I didn't even notice I was doing it. Yosef Schwartz is like, how many times this week, Phil? You're going to do it 5 times? What are you going to do? So we all have these, like, these things that fall out of our mouth. We don't even think about them. We don't even know we're doing them. So when a guy says a neder twice, the lashon of a neder twice, our Mishnah is, but you don't say the language of the neder twice. If you're saying it twice, so then you're going to get stuck with a double nazirus. So in our Mishnah, the replication of the language is the same. And the Gemara is qualifying and says, Rav Huna says our Mishnah is not right, which is very difficult. What's his marimako? How can Rav Huna just out of the blue change a Mishnah? That requires Rishonim, that requires time, because Rav Huna is out of order. Rav Huna was not an early Amora like Rav was, who's the Rav Tanu who Palik. Rav Huna was, there were multiple Rav Hunas, but usually the one we're talking about is a 3rd or 4th century Amora. He's 100 plus years out. So that's difficult on its own. But anyway, Shmuel doesn't agree. But let's finish the Shita of Rav Huna. Aval Omar Hareini Nazir Hayom Ein Chal Naziris al Naziris. Again, it's exactly against our Mishnah. It's very difficult. Shmuel Amar, Afilu Amar Hareini Nazir Hayom, Chala Nazir Salah. So says the Gemara, and now Shmuel, really, the Gemara is asking a question on Rav Huna's. But let's just clarify the machlokas. The machlokas that we're seeing right now is what qualifies as a double neder. Is it repeating the same exact phrase? Or no, is it one phrase, one way, and the second phrase a slightly different way? Rav Huna seems to say that the same exact phrase twice is just shogar b'fiv. It doesn't really count. It's ein naziris chal al naziris. But once you change the language ever so slightly, even by saying hayom and lamachar in one and versus the other, that's enough to have them stack. The Gemara now asks against Rav Huna, if that's correct what you're saying, then we really need to modify our Mishnah. Ula Rav Huna, adatana ein shvua b'soch shvua. Why would our Mishnah speak about ein shvua b'soch shvua? We didn't finish talking about what we need to talk about, which is the chakiras within the Nedarim. What it should have said is, listen, yesh neder b'soch neder, ve'ein neder b'soch neder. How is it that we have these 2 cases? If a person says, Hareni nazir hayom, hareni nazir l'machar, yesh neder b'soch neder, this is what Rav Huna should have had in our Mishnah. Hareni nazir hayom, hareni nazir hayom. So then, turning to the top of Yud Zayin Amud Beis, then it should have been ein neder b'soch neder. So the Gemara is saying, Rav Huna, if you're right, then the Mishnah should have really looked very, very different. First of all, it could be that what the Gemara is saying over here to Rav Huna is, if you're reworking the Mishnah, rework the Mishnah. But if you're not reworking the Mishnah and you're just kind of injecting your own feelings over here, like, it doesn't work. It doesn't work because there's not enough detail. Because there are sometimes Nedarim are not chal on one another. For example, according to Rav Huna, if you keep the same exact language, it doesn't work. Are you saying chasuri mechzer b'hachik tani, like we typically see when there's a text change in the Gemara? Not simple. And the Gemara concludes on the top of Daf Yomi, a bit on the top line, kasha. This is a very good question that we're asking against Rav Huna, and we don't have an answer. We'll pick up on Shabbos right here at the very, very top of Yud Zayin Amud Beis. Wishing you all a beautiful night.